I asked 100 millionaires how they really made their first big money, expecting different stories from each one. But what I discovered completely changed how I see success itself in America. I thought I would hear about lucky stocks, perfect timing, or secret business hacks, but instead, every answer pointed back to one uncomfortable truth that most people refuse to accept. One millionaire told me he started with nothing but $200 inches his pocket, and even that wasn't the reason he succeeded, because money was never the real starting point of his journey. Another woman who built a multi-million-dollar company said she failed for 7 straight years before anything worked, and most people quit long before reaching that breaking point. As I kept listening, a pattern started to appear, something so simple that it almost sounded too obvious to be real. Yet every wealthy person kept repeating it in different words. They didn't talk about luck as much as people think, and they didn't talk about connections the way outsiders assume. Instead, they kept pointing to something internal and invisible. One millionaire said the real difference was not what they did after they got money, but what they were willing to do long before there was any guarantee of reward. Another explained that he worked on the same idea for 3 years without making a single dollar, and most people around him thought he was wasting his life completely. I started realizing that the biggest gap between wealthy people and everyone else wasn't intelligence, but patience under pressure when nothing seems to be working. A self-made investor told me the moment he stopped looking for fast results was the moment everything finally started to grow in his favor. That statement hit hard because it contradicted everything most people are taught about speed, instant success, and overnight transformation in modern life. But the more interviews I collected, the clearer it became that wealth was not built in moments. It was built in seasons of invisible struggle. One man said he worked night shifts for years while building his business in silence, not telling anyone because he didn't want outside opinions to break his focus. Another millionaire admitted that he almost quit 11 times, but what kept him going was not motivation. It was pure refusal to accept failure as final. I noticed something even more interesting. Every one of them had a point where they looked completely average, unnoticed, and financially stuck for longer than they expected. Yet that phase, the one most people hate the most, was exactly where they said their real identity as a millionaire was quietly being formed. One entrepreneur said, "The biggest mistake people make is assuming success is about doing something extraordinary, when in reality, it is about doing ordinary things longer than everyone else." Another told me discipline is not exciting, but it is the only reason he is free today, while others who started with him are still stuck at the beginning. As the interviews continued, I realized I wasn't learning different strategies. I was learning the same principle repeated in different lives, different cities, and different industries. And that principle was so simple, yet so powerful, that it completely explains why most people stay broke, while a small percentage quietly build extreme wealth over time. One millionaire looked straight into the camera and said the truth most people avoid. You are not waiting for opportunity. You are being shaped by how you respond to discomfort every single day. He explained that early success is not about resources, but about how fast you can adapt when everything around you feels uncertain and unstable. Another business owner said his first real breakthrough came not from a brilliant idea, but from solving a problem nobody else wanted to deal with consistently. That moment, he said, taught him that money follows responsibility, especially the kind of responsibility most people try to avoid. I kept hearing variations of the same message, that wealth is less about talent and more about endurance when progress is painfully slow. A real estate investor shared that his first deal took over a year to close, and during that time he faced rejection almost daily without seeing any reward. But instead of quitting, he treated every rejection as data, slowly improving his approach until the results finally started to shift. Another millionaire said something that stayed with me. Most people don't fail because they are incapable. They fail because they need constant validation, he said the moment he stopped needing approval. His decisions became clearer, faster, and far more profitable in the long run. I noticed that almost all of them had a strange relationship with time. They were willing to suffer short-term discomfort for long-term stability. One tech founder explained that while others chased trends, he spent years building something boring, but essential. and that decision made him wealthy later. He said, "Boredom is often the first sign you are building something real, not just chasing excitement or temporary hype." Another millionaire admitted he had no clear direction at the beginning, but he stayed in motion long enough for clarity to eventually appear. That idea changed everything, because it meant clarity is not something you wait for. It is something you create through consistent action. I also learned that most of them were not fearless. They were simply willing to act despite fear, instead of waiting for fear to disappear. One woman said she built her first successful company while constantly doubting herself. But she refused to let doubt make decisions for her. She said, "Confidence is not a starting point. It is a result of surviving enough situations you thought you could not handle." Another millionaire described his early life as chaotic, but said that chaos forced him to become extremely focused on what actually mattered. He believed that pressure, when handled correctly, becomes the foundation of discipline and long-term thinking. By this point in the interviews, a clear pattern had formed. Success was not a mystery, but it was also not as comfortable as most people wish it would be. One self-made millionaire said the biggest turning point in his life was not a business win, but the decision to stop switching paths every time things got difficult. He explained that most people restart their journey too, many times, never allowing any single effort enough time to actually compound into real results. Another investor said he didn't become wealthy because he was smarter, but because he stayed consistent while others constantly changed directions. I began to see consistency not as a simple habit, but as a competitive advantage that silently builds over years without showing immediate proof. One entrepreneur admitted he spent 5 years earning almost nothing, but those years taught him skills that later produced millions in revenue. He said most people only see the reward phase, never the invisible preparation phase where everything feels slow and meaningless. Another millionaire shared that he deliberately avoided distractions, even when they looked like better opportunities at the time. He believed that focus is not about doing more, but about refusing to dilute your energy across things that don't compound. I noticed a strange truth in every story. They were not chasing success. They were building systems that made success unavoidable. Over time, a real estate mogul said his biggest asset was not property, but his ability to stay patient when markets were unpredictable and stressful. He explained that emotional control in uncertain situations is what separates long-term wealth builders from short-term gamblers. Another millionaire said he trained himself to ignore short-term noise, even when everyone around him was panicking or celebrating. That emotional discipline, he said, was more valuable than any single investment decision he ever made. I started realizing that wealth is not just financial, it is psychological, built through repeated control of reaction and impulse. One founder said he didn't trust motivation anymore, because motivation changes daily, but systems and routines do not. He built his entire life around repeatable actions that worked even on days when he felt completely unmotivated. Another millionaire explained that early success came when he stopped trying to impress others and started focusing on solving real problems deeply. He said, attention from others is temporary, but value created in silence eventually becomes impossible to ignore. I kept hearing a deeper message underneath all their stories. Wealth is not an event. It is the result of identity built through repetition. And at this point, I realized the answer I was looking for was not hidden in strategy, but in the way they all train themselves to think and act differently. Every single day, one millionaire told me the moment his life changed was when he stopped asking, "Will this work?" and started asking, "How can I make this work no matter what?" That shift, he said, turned him from someone who reacts to circumstances into someone who actively creates outcomes from them. Another business owner said he learned early that excuses feel reasonable in the moment, but they always become expensive over time. He explained that every excuse he made in his 20s turned into a delay in his financial freedom later in life. I began to see that accountability was a hidden theme in every millionaire's story, even when they didn't use that exact word. One investor said he stopped blaming the economy, timing, or luck, and instead focused only on what he could directly influence every day. That mindset, he said, removed emotional confusion and replaced it with simple, consistent execution. Another millionaire shared that he trained himself to act even when outcomes were uncertain. because waiting for certainty always cost him opportunities. He said certainty is often an illusion people use to avoid risk. But real growth always exists on the other side of uncertainty. I noticed a pattern where every successful person had a history of making uncomfortable decisions long before they saw any reward. One entrepreneur said he made decisions that looked irrational to others, but internally he was building long-term leverage. He explained that short-term criticism often hides long-term validation if you stay committed long enough. Another millionaire said he stopped comparing his progress to others because comparison destroys patience and distorts reality. He believed that focus disappears the moment you start measuring your journey against someone else's highlight reel. I also heard a repeated idea that most people underestimate how long real success actually takes to build. One founder said if you knew how slow the process really was, you would either quit early or finally become serious about consistency. He said most people fail because they expect exponential results from linear effort in the beginning stages. Another millionaire explained that wealth is simply delayed reward for decisions made correctly for a long enough period of time. I realized that none of them were chasing shortcuts anymore. They were building momentum that compounds quietly in the background. And that momentum, according to every story, was the real secret behind everything they had achieved. One millionaire said the hardest part was not starting, but surviving the long middle phase where nothing seems to be improving at all. He explained that this phase filters out almost everyone, because it feels like effort without evidence of progress. Another entrepreneur said he had to train himself to respect slow progress instead of fearing it, because slow progress is still progress that compounds. I started noticing that patience wasn't passive in their stories. It was an active skill. They practiced every single day. One investor said he used to check results obsessively, but later learned that constant checking only creates anxiety, not better outcomes. He shifted his focus from outcomes to process, and that's when his performance finally stabilized. Another millionaire shared that he built discipline by removing easy distractions, one by one, until focus became unavoidable. He said environment design mattered more than willpower, because willpower eventually runs out under pressure. I noticed that many of them intentionally placed themselves in situations where failure was expensive, so success became necessary. One founder said pressure became his teacher, forcing him to level up faster than comfort ever could. Another millionaire admitted that early on he often felt behind in life, but that feeling pushed him to outwork his limitations instead of accepting them. He said feeling behind can either destroy you or define you, depending on what you do with it. I also heard a powerful truth repeated in different ways. Most breakthroughs happen right after the point where most people quit. One business owner said he almost gave up right before his first major success, not realizing how close he actually was. That experience, he said, changed how he interprets struggle forever. Another millionaire explained that success is rarely sudden. It only looks sudden from the outside looking in. Behind every overnight success, there are years of invisible work that no one talks about. I realized that the real message from all 100 millionaires was not about money alone, but about persistence through uncertainty. They all built wealth by doing what others avoided, for longer than others were willing to try. And in the end, the answer they all gave was simple: stay consistent long enough, and what feels impossible today slowly becomes your new reality.